That Thanksgiving, I learned how cold family can be, not from the food they served me, but from the way they looked at the man I loved, as if he was less than everyone else at the table. They sat us in the corner, gave us plastic plates, and handed us food long after everyone else had eaten. I smiled, but inside, I felt my heart breaking. Because love shouldn't come with conditions, and yet my parents made sure we knew where we stood in their house that night. Thank you for watching and for giving me your time. It means more than you may know, and I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from, because every story feels different when shared across places and hearts. That night at the table, as I sat with my plate growing colder, I kept thinking about how unfair it was, not just to me, but to the man who had done nothing but love me with all he had. I remembered the warnings from my mother and father, the way they whispered that I could have married someone richer, someone with status, someone who looked good on paper, but not him. Yet he was the one who held me up when I was tired, the one who made sure I laughed when life was heavy, the one who gave me warmth when I had nothing left. And as I looked around that room filled with polished silverware and empty pride, I wondered how people who called themselves family could turn kindness into something to be ashamed of. I grew up in a house where image meant everything, where my parents believed that success was measured by the size of your home, the shine of your car, and the circles you dined in. And from the time I was a girl, they reminded me that I was expected to marry well, to carry the family name into rooms filled with wealth and recognition. But life does not always follow the script others write for you. And when I met him, he didn't arrive with polished shoes or promises of fortunes. He came with something deeper, something I had never felt before. A gentleness that made me feel safe, and a determination that told me, no matter what we faced, he would stand by me. My parents could not see that. They only saw a man who worked long hours for little pay. A man who didn't dress the way they thought he should. A man who they believed would hold me back instead of lifting me higher. Every family dinner before that Thanksgiving was laced with quiet remarks, a raised eyebrow from my father, a sigh from my mother, a whispered comment when they thought we could not hear. And though I tried to brush it aside, their disapproval hung heavy over us like a storm that never passed. I held on to love, because I knew what we had was real, and yet, in their eyes, it was never enough. And that night, as we sat away from the main table, their actions spoke louder than all their words ever had, telling me clearly that in their world, kindness and loyalty could never outweigh money and pride. When the invitation for Thanksgiving arrived, I wanted to believe it was an olive branch, a small attempt from my parents to show that maybe, just maybe, they were ready to accept the man I chose and the life I built with him. But even the way my mother's voice sounded over the phone carried a weight that made my stomach twist. She said we could join them if we wanted, as if our presence was optional, as if we were guests instead of family. I remember hanging up and staring at the wall, telling myself that I should be grateful, that at least they hadn't left us out entirely. But deep down, I felt the sting of what those words really meant. They weren't welcoming us with open arms. They were making space because it was expected, because they didn't want whispers among relatives about the empty chairs at their perfectly decorated table. And even in their act of invitation, there was no warmth, no genuine love, only duty and appearances. I told my husband about it that evening, and he smiled in that gentle way he always did. The kind of smile that said he already knew what they thought, but he wasn't going to let it weigh him down. He told me that he was fine, that he would sit wherever they placed him and eat whatever was given, that as long as I was by his side, nothing else mattered. And while his words comforted me, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. I wanted so badly for my parents to see what I saw in him, to recognize his quiet strength and the way he carried himself with dignity, no matter the situation. But instead, they chose to look past all of that, blinded by their obsession with status and wealth. The days leading up to Thanksgiving were heavy with that unspoken dread. And still I prepared, picking out a simple dress, making sure my husband's shirt was pressed, telling myself that if we walked in looking our best, maybe they would soften. Maybe they would look at him and see the man I loved instead of the man they judged. But in my heart, I already knew the truth. I knew that no matter how polished we appeared, they would always find us lacking in their eyes. Because what they wanted was not love or loyalty, but a mirror of their own ambition. And my husband refused to wear that mask. So when the day finally came and we stepped into that house, the air already thick with the smell of roasted turkey and spiced pies, my heart beat faster, not with excitement, but with caution, as though I was walking into a test I was destined to fail. Their smiles were tight, their eyes cold, and though they said the words welcome, I felt none of it. And in that moment I realized that this was not a gathering of family, it was a stage for them to remind me of the choice I had made and the price they believed I would pay for it. The moment we walked further inside, I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes following us, cousins whispering under their breath, aunts giving each other knowing glances, and though no one said anything outright, their silence spoke volumes. I saw the long table set with polished silver, fine china, glasses catching the glow of the chandelier, and every seat around it filled with those my parents held in higher regard, the ones they believed had earned a place in their perfect display of family pride. Then came the moment that told me everything I needed to know. My mother motioned us not toward that shining table, but toward a smaller one, pushed near the kitchen door. 2 folding chairs waiting with paper napkins and plastic plates, as if we were visitors who had arrived late and needed to be accommodated quickly. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat as I sat down, the clatter of dishes and laughter from the main table ringing in my ears while I stared at the space between us and them, a space that wasn't just physical, but carved from years of disapproval and rejection. When the food was finally brought to us, it wasn't hot, it wasn't fresh, it was what was left after everyone else had been served. Lukewarm turkey, stuffing already hardened at the edges, mashed potatoes with barely a spoonful of gravy. My mother set the plates down with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said they were short on space this year, as though we didn't notice the empty seat beside my uncle or the 2 chairs left at the far end of the main table. My husband, calm as ever, placed his hand lightly on mine, and that small touch steadied me, though inside I felt the sting of humiliation sharper than any knife could cut. I glanced at him, expecting anger or frustration, but all I saw was quiet strength, a man willing to endure their cruelty with grace because he refused to let them see him break. That steadiness made my own heart ache, because while I wanted to cry, while I wanted to stand up and shout that love was worth more than any fortune, he sat there in silence, showing them that he could not be diminished by their scorn. And as I looked around that room, filled with laughter that felt more like mockery, I understood in that moment that this Thanksgiving was not about food, not about family, but about a test of dignity. And while they thought they were winning by placing us in the corner, what they didn't realize was that their cruelty was only revealing the depth of their own emptiness. As I sat there, forcing myself to take small bites of the food that had already gone cold, the voices from the main table grew louder, not with kindness or warmth, but with the sound of boasting and pride. Each story bigger than the last, each word meant to shine brighter than the one before. My uncle spoke of his new business deal and how much profit he had turned in just one season. My cousin laughed as she described her upcoming vacation to Europe. And my parents sat tall, their smiles wide, proud to be surrounded by what they believed were signs of success. Every laugh, every clink of glass, every passing glance felt like another reminder that in their eyes we did not belong. That our love, our life, and our quiet happiness would never measure up to the glitter of their wealth. It was not just the words that hurt, but the way they looked past us as though we were invisible. As though our corner table was meant to keep us hidden away from their carefully crafted image. I heard one aunt murmur something about sacrifices being wasted, and another cousin lean in to say she could never marry beneath her, their voices carrying easily across the room because they did not care if I heard. My father chuckled and agreed, his eyes fixed on me for just a moment before he turned back to his plate, and that small gesture carried more weight than any long speech could. It was his way of telling me that he still believed I had chosen wrongly. I gripped my fork tightly, trying to steady my breath, feeling a mixture of shame and anger twisting inside me. But then I glanced at my husband once again. He sat calmly, his back straight, his eyes focused on his meal, as if their words could not touch him, as if he had chosen to rise above their mockery by refusing to let it pierce his spirit. That strength in him gave me a strange comfort, though the ache in my chest remained, and in that moment I realized that this gathering, this table, this feast, was nothing more than a performance, a stage set to parade wealth and status, while the true measure of love and honor sat quietly in the corner with me. And as I listened to them continue, bragging about promotions, expensive cars, and future plans, I could not help but think how small it all sounded compared to the loyalty and grace sitting beside me. And that thought planted a seed of calm in my heart, because I knew then that the story was not finished, and the last word would not belong to them. Through it all, my husband remained steady, his calmness almost unsettling in a room filled with arrogance and shallow laughter. He did not flinch when they ignored him. He did not shrink when they whispered about him. Instead, he carried himself with a dignity that seemed to silence every insult without needing a single word in reply. I sat there watching him, and while my heart ached from the sting of rejection, I also felt a swell of pride, because here was a man who had been mocked and dismissed. Yet he refused to let bitterness take hold of him. He simply sat tall, ate quietly, and every so often, he turned to me with a soft smile. A smile that told me he was unshaken, a smile that reminded me why I had chosen him despite all the warnings. I felt my own hands trembling, my fork rattling against the plate as though it carried the weight of everything they had done to us. But his hand found mine under the table, warm and steady, and that small touch pulled me back from the edge of breaking. In that moment, I realized that the strength of love is not measured in loud defenses or grand gestures. It is measured in those quiet moments when one person steadies another against the storm. He leaned slightly closer, his voice low enough for only me to hear, and he said that no matter where we sat, no matter how they treated us, he was proud to be by my side, and those words struck deeper than any insult that had been thrown our way. I looked at him then, and thought how blind my parents truly were, for they could not see the wealth that sat before them, not in dollars or possessions, but in loyalty, in kindness, in a heart that held more worth than their whole table combined. As the chatter and bragging carried on around us, I no longer tasted the bitterness of cold food. I felt instead the warmth of the man beside me, and though humiliation still pressed heavily on me, I knew their cruelty could not erase the truth that love had already given me everything their money never could. As I sat there holding his hand beneath the table, trying to draw strength from the quiet steadiness he carried so naturally, he leaned toward me just slightly, his eyes never betraying a hint of anger, and in the softest whisper he asked me if I wanted him to tell them now. For a moment I didn't understand, my mind clouded by the sting of humiliation and the noise of laughter echoing from the main table. But then he gave me a look, calm and certain, and I realized he was carrying a secret I had not yet known. With the room still buzzing, he told me in a voice meant only for me that the night before he had gone to the casino, and against all odds, after hours of careful play and unwavering patience, he had walked away with $200,000 in winnings. My breath caught, not just from the shock of the number, but from the way he said it with such composure, as if it wasn't the money that mattered most, but the proof that fortune had smiled on him in a way no one at that table could have imagined. I stared at him, my heart racing faster than it had all evening, and in that instant, I saw the choice that lay before us. We could have turned the whole room upside down with that revelation, silenced every mocking laugh, and forced my parents to choke on their pride. But instead he waited for my answer, his question hanging in the air between us like a delicate thread. Should he tell them? Should he rise and make them swallow their scorn with the weight of the truth? I looked back toward the main table, saw the glint of crystal glasses raised in shallow toasts, heard the voices boasting about investments and possessions, and I thought how easy it would be to cut through it all with one sentence. Yet, as I turned back to him, I saw in his eyes something far greater than the temptation of pride. I saw his desire to protect me from stooping to their level, his wish to remind me that dignity cannot be bought and does not need to be proven. So I shook my head gently, telling him without words that the secret could remain ours for now, that the satisfaction of knowing was enough. And he nodded with that same quiet strength, squeezing my hand once more as if to seal the choice we had made together. The chatter continued, the plates clattered, the laughter rang on, and none of them had any idea that the man they were dismissing, the man they had pushed into a corner, was holding a truth far richer than all their empty pride combined. In that moment, my heart swelled with both pain and power, because while they thought they had stripped us of worth, they had no idea that the very ground they stood on was already shifting beneath their feet. I sat there in silence, my hand still in his, and the longer I thought about what he had told me, the more my heart began to steady, because I realized that the true power in that moment was not in exposing the truth, but in holding it close like a hidden treasure that only we could see. Around us, the room buzzed with shallow pride, stories of earnings and possessions tossed about like crowns. Yet none of them knew that the man they mocked was carrying more than numbers on a slip of paper. He was carrying proof that fortune does not belong to those who think they deserve it, but to those who face the world with patience and courage. I watched him, the way he lifted his fork calmly, the way he nodded politely when someone glanced our way, never betraying even a flicker of anger. And I realized that the real difference between him and them was not the money he had won, but the grace with which he carried his life. For years, I had defended him against my parents' whispers, their warnings that he would never give me the kind of life they believed I deserved. And there, in that moment, I knew without doubt that I had chosen rightly, because while they measured worth in possessions, he measured it in love, in loyalty, and in dignity. It would have been so easy to stand and declare the truth, to let the numbers crash down on them like a storm and watch their smug faces twist in disbelief, but instead we stayed quiet, choosing to leave them wrapped in their illusions. There was something powerful in that silence, something that turned humiliation into strength, because while they believed they were teaching us a lesson, it was they who were being measured and found lacking. When the meal dragged on and the laughter filled the air like a hollow echo, I leaned closer to him and whispered that one day they would see, one day they would realize that everything they valued so deeply could be taken in an instant, and what remained would be nothing compared to the life we were building together. He gave me that small, steady smile again, the one that reached deeper than any words could, and I felt a calm wash over me, because the truth was already ours, and we didn't need their approval to make it real. In that corner, with cold food and plastic plates, we held a fortune greater than they could ever understand. And while they believed we had been put in our place, they did not know that soon it would be us deciding where everyone truly belonged. As the night went on, the weight of their judgment pressed heavier on my shoulders. And just when I thought it could not grow more suffocating, a sharp remark cut through the air. One of my uncles laughing as he asked when we planned to stop leaning on my parents and finally stand on our own 2 feet, the words dripping with mockery as if our very presence was a burden to the family name. My cheeks burned hot, my throat tightened, and for a brief moment I wanted to slam my hand on the table and shout the truth so loud it would rattle the chandelier above their heads. But before I could even form a word, my husband set down his fork gently and straightened his back, his calmness filling the air like a tide rolling in to drown their cruelty. With a voice so steady it hushed the room, he said that we had been blessed, that in fact, fortune had found its way to us in a most unexpected manner. And though he spoke no numbers, no details, the room fell into silence as though they suddenly feared what he might reveal. My parents shifted uncomfortably, my mother's smile tightening at the edges, my father clearing his throat as if to regain some measure of control. But it was too late. The atmosphere had changed. For the first time that evening, they no longer looked at him with disdain. They looked at him with hesitation, with suspicion, with the quiet dread that perhaps the man they had dismissed so easily was holding something far greater than all their proud boasts combined. I sat beside him, my heart thundering, and though he never said the amount, though he never pulled out the slip of proof, I knew he had already shifted the balance, because in that moment they saw not a poor man married to their daughter, but someone whose silence carried more weight than their laughter. He leaned back then, returning to his meal, as if nothing had happened, and the room slowly filled again with chatter. But it was weaker now, thinner, like air slowly leaking from a balloon. And as I looked around the table, I realized that their power over us had cracked. That even without a declaration, even without a scene, my husband had shown them something they could never unsee, that the dignity they tried to strip away had always been ours, and no amount of cold food or plastic plates could take it. When the meal finally dragged to its close, I could feel the shift in the air, the laughter at the main table no longer as sharp, the voices not as confident, as if some unspoken question had settled among them, one they did not dare to voice aloud. My parents avoided my eyes, passing dishes and refilling glasses with hands that moved a little too quickly, pretending everything was as it had been before. But I knew better. I saw the unease in their faces, the way their smiles faltered every time they glanced toward my husband, as though they could sense there was more behind his calm silence than they had ever imagined. We rose from that little corner table, plastic plates cleared away as though they had never existed, and we thanked them politely, our voices steady even as my heart beat hard in my chest. I could tell they wanted to keep us there longer, to probe, to find answers to the riddle they themselves had created by their scorn. But we gave them nothing. My husband held the door for me, his hand firm at my back, and as the cold night air met my face, I felt a release, a weight lifting the moment we stepped outside that house. Walking to the car, I realized that we had taken back something they thought they had the right to control. Because while they had tried to shame us, to make us feel small, the truth sat quietly in our hearts. A truth no insult could erase. I glanced at him as he started the engine, his expression calm, his hands steady on the wheel, and I thought how strange it was that they had spent all evening trying to prove their superiority, when in the end it was his silence, his composure, that had spoken louder than anything they could have said. The drive home felt different that night. The world outside the window quieter, almost softer. And though the sting of humiliation still lingered, it was tempered by the knowledge that we carried something greater than their approval. We carried the kind of strength that doesn't need to be announced, the kind that waits patiently, knowing the right moment will always come. The next morning, when the sun slipped through the curtains and filled our small living room with light, I sat quietly with a cup of coffee in my hands, replaying the night before in my mind, and though the sting of humiliation still pressed against me, it no longer held the same power, because I knew that everything had changed. My husband came to sit beside me, setting down an envelope on the table, the very proof of his winnings, crisp and undeniable, and he smiled in that calm way of his, the kind of smile that said we no longer had to carry the weight of their judgment. Together we began to talk about what to do next, not with bitterness or the need to prove ourselves, but with hope, with excitement, with the quiet joy of knowing that a door had opened for us that no one could shut. We spent the day walking through homes, rooms filled with light, kitchens where warmth could linger, and spaces where laughter could finally belong to us, without fear of being drowned out by scorn. Each step through those halls felt like a reclaiming of everything my parents had tried to deny us, a reminder that while they served us cold food and looked down on us as though we were less, life itself had offered us a seat at a much bigger table, one built not of pride, but of resilience. By evening we had chosen the place that felt like ours, walls that seemed to breathe with possibility, and as we signed the papers, paid in full, and held the keys in our hands, I felt a surge of strength I hadn't known in years. A strength born not from money alone, but from the dignity of knowing we had built something on our own. That night as we stood in the empty living room of our new home, our voices echoing softly against the bare walls, I turned to him and whispered that no matter what my parents thought, no matter how they measured worth, we had proven to ourselves that love, patience, and quiet perseverance could outlast any insult. He wrapped his arm around me, and I rested my head against his shoulder. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Free from their judgment, free from their pride, free from the cold seat in the corner of their house, because now we had a place of our own, warm and waiting. And this time no one could take our seat away. When the time came, we sent out invitations for a small gathering in our new home. The kind of gathering filled with warmth, where the table was long enough for everyone, and no one was left in a corner. But this time, my parents' names were not on the list. I knew it would reach them through whispers. I knew they would hear about the house paid in full, the rooms filled with laughter, and the table where love had the only seat that mattered. And though part of me wanted them to see what they had missed, another part of me realized they had already revealed who they were, and I no longer needed their approval to feel whole. Standing in that kitchen with my husband by my side, I understood that dignity is not about proving anyone wrong. It is about living in a way that makes you proud, even when others try to strip you bare. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. Your presence means more than you can imagine. And if my words touched you in any way, please subscribe and join me here again, because there will always be more truths to share.